Boo your bread. Titi's voice rang out as she balanced a tray of bread on her head, walking down the busy street. Today, the market was slow, and she couldn't return home empty-handed. She needed to make a reasonable amount of money. Otherwise, she and Amina would either munch on the loaf or go to bed hungry. Titi was Amina's older sister. They had lost their parents in a devastating flood of disaster that struck when no one had expected it, leaving behind ruined properties and broken lives. The two sisters had been at church that day, far from home, when the heavy rain began. Their family had never been wealthy. They lived in one of the poorest neighborhoods in Lagos. Despite having little, Titi and Amina never lacked the basics. Their father ran a small bicycle repair shop, and their mother sold bread on the side. The floodwaters came suddenly, rising higher than anyone could have imagined. Titi and Amina were stranded at church, unable to return home as the streets quickly turned into raging rivers. By the time they managed to make their way back, it was too late. Their house was destroyed, their belongings washed away in the torrent. Titi had tried to hold it together for Amina, but the weight of their loss was too much. They had no parents, no home, and now, no way to survive except by relying on the little they had left. Days passed in a blur of uncertainty. Titi found herself searching for work wherever she could, taking up odd jobs just to buy food and keep Amina fed. The bread tray on her head was her only hope for a steady income. Each loaf sold meant another meal, another day of survival. Her thoughts drifted back to their parents, how hard they had worked to provide, even when times were tough. Her father, always tinkering with his bicycles, and her mother, up before dawn to bake the bread that had once filled their home with warmth. But now, Titi was the one holding the family together. It was a heavy burden, one that sometimes felt too much to bear. But for Amina, she couldn't falter. She wouldn't. Titi's eyes scanned the crowded street, hoping someone would buy a loaf. She needed the money, not just for food, but for hope. Hope that one day things would be better, that she and Amina could rebuild their lives, even if it meant starting from nothing. As Titi walked through the crowded street, her feet ached from the long hours on the hot pavement. But she couldn't stop. The faces around her were too busy to notice the tiredness in her eyes, too preoccupied with their own struggles. Still, she pressed on, her voice echoing in the air, calling out, "Buy your bread." The sun was beginning to set, casting a warm glow over the market, but it felt like time was slipping away. Amina was waiting at home, her little face full of hope, and Titi couldn't let her down. She had promised to make enough money today to buy rice, something simple, something filling. But she wasn't sure she'd make it. The loaves on her tray had barely sold, and the streets were growing emptier by the minute. "Boo your bread, fresh bread," she called again, her voice a little more desperate this time. A man in a worn-out shirt stopped and looked at her tray. He smiled, his teeth yellow against his dark skin. "How much?" he asked, his voice slow. Titi's heart raced. 300 naira for a loaf, sir," she said, her voice steady even though her hands were shaking. The man nodded, reached into his pocket, and handed her the money. Titi's fingers brushed against the crumpled bills, and for a moment, she felt a glimmer of relief. But just as quickly, the weight of her situation hit her again. That single loaf wouldn't feed Amina for long. "Thank you, sir," Titi said, bowing slightly. As the man walked away, she turned and spotted a familiar face, a woman from her neighborhood. The woman looked at Titi with pity, but there was no offer of help. Just another reminder of how different things were now. Titi sighed, adjusting the tray on her head. She had to keep moving. Her thoughts turned back to Amina, who had been so brave since the flood. At only 10 years old, Amina had managed to hold on to hope in a way that Titi couldn't fully understand. Maybe it was because she hadn't yet seen the full weight of the world, the loss, the pain, the struggle. Or maybe it was because Amina was still a child, and children could hold on to hope when adults couldn't. Titi's eyes welled up, but she blinked the tears away. She couldn't cry, not here. Not now. Not in front of the people who walked past her, too busy with their own lives to notice. Just then, she heard a soft voice calling her name. "Titi!" She turned, surprised. It was a young boy from the neighborhood, maybe a little younger than Amina. He was holding a small bundle of fruit. "You haven't sold all the bread yet?" he asked. "No, not yet," she replied, forcing a smile. The boy looked at her with a kind of sympathy she hadn't expected. "You know, Titi, my big brother has been asking after you. He said if you ever need help." Titi cut him off, her pride flaring. "I'm fine," she said, more sharply than she intended. "Thank you, but I can manage." The boy hesitated. Then, with a small nod, he walked away. She couldn't afford to accept charity from the young man, Titi, who had been wooing her for a long time and lived on the same street. She remembered the popular adage, "Never accept free gifts from a man, or you'll owe him so much that you'll have no choice but to pay with your body." For Amina's sake, and for the memory of their parents, she couldn't afford to become a victim to any young man. It was already evening, and as Titi looked at the small amount of cash she had made, she knew it was one of those nights they would have bread for dinner. She dragged her weary feet through the dusty road, and soon she was home. Amina was still out praying with the other children when she spotted Titi. She ran to her and hugged her tightly. "Welcome, sister." As they entered the house, Titi carefully lowered the bread and covered it with a neat nylon bag. "I was sent home from school," Amina said. "Why?" Titi asked, concerned. "But I asked your teacher to give me some time." Titi's heart sank at Amina's words. She had pleaded with the teacher just last week, promising to gather the money, but it seemed time had run out. Amina hesitated before speaking again. "Teacher said I can't come back until we pay at least half." Titi exhaled slowly, forcing a smile. "Don't worry, my love. I'll sort it out." She moved to the corner of the small room, where an old tin box sat beneath their shared mattress. She lifted the lid and peered inside. A few crumpled Naira notes, the last of her savings, stared back at her. She counted carefully. It wasn't enough. Her fingers trembled as she shut the box. "Take this," she said, handing Amina the money. "It's not the full amount, but I'll find the rest tomorrow." Amina looked down at the money, then back at her sister. "Are you sure, Titi?" Titi cupped Amina's face, brushing a thumb over her cheek. "Of course, baby. You have to stay in school." She grabbed an old notebook and tore out a page, then sat down to write a letter to Amina's teacher. Her handwriting was neat but hurried. "Dear Ma, please allow my sister to stay in school while I gather the rest of the money. I am working hard, and I promise to pay soon. She wants to learn, and I don't want her to lose hope. Please, help us." Titi folded the note carefully and handed it to Amina. "Give this to your teacher first thing in the morning." Amina nodded and tucked the letter into her small school bag. Dinner was simple bread again. Titi tore the loaf in half and handed a piece to Amina. They chewed in silence, both lost in thought. Amina leaned against her sister. "Mama used to say eating together makes a meal special." Titi forced a small laugh. "Then this is the most special bread in the world."
They finished their meal, and Titi lay down, pulling Amina close. "I'll make everything better," she whispered, more to herself than to Amina. Amina snuggled into her warmth. "As long as we have each other, I'm happy." Titi pressed a kiss to her forehead. Tomorrow, she would find a way. She had to. Titi's heart pounded in her chest as Titi and his gang approached. She had known this was a risk, but desperation had pushed her here. Now, standing before him, she regretted it instantly. Titi smirked, his dark eyes gleaming with amusement. "What are you doing in my area?" he asked, his voice low but filled with menace. He tilted his head, looking her over as if she were something to be inspected. "After asking you to be my woman and you refused, you still have the guts to come to my street?" Titi swallowed hard. "I came to see you," she started, choosing her words carefully. But before she could finish, one of the boys beside Titi reached out and snatched 2 loaves from her tray. "Hey!" she gasped, her hands tightening on the tray. "Please stop!" Her plea fell on deaf ears. The other boys immediately followed suit, grabbing loaf after loaf. tearing them open with their teeth and stuffing their mouths like wild animals. Crumbs and pieces of bread fell to the dusty ground as they devoured her hard work. Titi's eyes welled with tears. "Please don't do this," she begged, her voice breaking. "This is all I have." Titi laughed cruelly, leaning closer until his breath was hot against her face. "And what can you do about it, eh? Maybe if you had said yes to me, you wouldn't be out here begging." Titi shook her head, her body trembling. "I just needed help." Titi's expression darkened. "Then let me help you." He nodded at one of his boys, who reached for the last loaf on her tray. Within seconds, every piece of bread was gone. Titi clutched the empty tray, feeling like the air had been knocked out of her lungs. "Disappear!" Titi suddenly barked, his voice sharp like a blade cutting through the air. Titi flinched. She knew better than to argue. With tears streaming down her face, she turned and ran, the sound of their laughter ringing in her ears. As she stumbled down the street, her vision blurred by tears, one thought consumed her: how would she face Amina tonight with nothing? Titi clutched the empty tray against her chest, her entire body trembling. Her hard work, her only source of survival, had been torn from her hands in an instant. She felt the sting of tears, but she refused to let them fall in front of Titi and his gang. She made her way home, her mind raced. Amina would be expecting something to eat when she returned. What was she going to tell her? Titi wiped her eyes and tried to think. Maybe she could find work just for the evening, maybe washing clothes or sweeping a shop. Anything to make a little money before heading home. She wandered the streets, asking at small stalls and shops, but no one had anything for her. The sun was already setting by the time she realized she had no other choice but to go home empty-handed. When she reached the small one-room space they called home, Amina was already waiting at the door, her eyes lighting up when she saw her sister. But as she took in Titi's empty hands, her smile faltered. "Titi, where's the bread?" she asked softly. Titi opened her mouth, but the words wouldn't come. The weight of the day finally crushed her, and before she could stop herself, she burst into tears. Amina rushed forward, wrapping her small arms around her sister. "It's okay," she whispered. "We'll be okay." But Titi wasn't sure how. That night, with no food in their stomachs, they lay in bed,
holding on to each other. Titi knew one thing for certain: she couldn't keep living like this. Something had to change. The next morning, Titi woke up to the sound of birds chirping outside the tiny window. The room was cold, but the warmth of Amina's presence beside her kept her from shivering. She hadn't slept much, her mind replaying the painful events of the previous day over and over again. How would she face Amina today? How would she get food for them? The thought of going to bed hungry again gnawed at her stomach. She looked down at Amina, who was still fast asleep, her small hands clutching her old blanket. Titi had promised her that things would get better. But how could she keep that promise when she was out of options? Titi sighed heavily. "Amina, wake up," she whispered, gently shaking her sister. Amina blinked and rubbed her eyes, her face lighting up when she saw her sister. "Good morning, Titi," she said with a sleepy smile. Titi smiled back, though her heart was heavy. "Sweetheart, you need to stay home today, okay?" she said softly. "I'll go to the market and get something for us to eat." Amina's brow furrowed. "But we didn't eat last night. Are you sure you'll be okay?" Titi nodded, even though she wasn't sure. "I'll be fine, Amina. You stay here and keep praying. I'll be back before you know it." Amina hesitated but nodded. "Be careful, Titi." With one last look at her little sister, Titi grabbed a bag and headed out the door. Her steps felt heavier than usual as she made her way to the market. She had one last option: Mama Eid. Mama Eid had always been kind to her family, even when things were tough. But there was a problem. Titi still owed her money from the last time she bought food on credit. As she reached Mama Eid's stall, she felt a flicker of hope. Mama Eid was arranging vegetables on the table when Titi approached. "Good morning, Mama Eid," Titi greeted her, trying to sound confident, though her voice trembled slightly. Mama Eid looked up and smiled warmly, but her eyes quickly narrowed when she saw Titi's empty hands. Ah, Titi, what brings you here today? You haven't paid me back for the last time you took on credit. Titi's heart sank. She had hoped Mama Eid might have forgotten. Mama Eid, she began. Please, I need your help just for today. I haven't sold much bread lately, and my sister, Amina, she can't go back to school without this money. I promise I'll pay you back soon. Mama Eid shook her head. Titi, you know how I feel about this. I can't give you any more credit until you settle what you owe. I have my own business to run. Titi felt her chest tighten, but she forced a smile, bowing her head slightly. I understand, Mama Eid. I'll come back soon with the money. With her heart heavy and the weight of rejection pressing on her, Titi slowly turned to leave. She wiped her eyes, though she wasn't sure if the tears were from the frustration of the situation or the defeat of yet another closed door. As she walked through the dusty street, feeling the sting of disappointment, a car pulled up beside her, and a young man's voice called out to her. Hey, I need your help. Startled, Titi quickly wiped her tears and turned to face him. The young man was dressed in a sharp, expensive suit, his car gleaming in the morning sunlight. He had the look of someone who didn't belong in the area, well-dressed and completely out of place. How can I help you? Titi said quickly, trying to move past him, but he stopped her. I need directions to the market, he said. Are you crying? Is everything okay? He asked, noticing the tears in Titi's eyes, concern evident in his voice. Titi hesitated, but she didn't want to talk. She was too embarrassed, too ashamed of how she felt. Still, the kindness in his voice made her stop walking. She looked at him for a long moment before she spoke.
I'm just trying to make things right for my sister, she said softly. I need to get to the market to buy some food, but it's complicated. The man smiled faintly, his eyes softening. I'm actually looking for directions to the market you're heading to. Do you mind taking me there? I'll be happy to take you in my car. Titi's heart raced at the offer. She had seen men like him before, rich, charming, but also dangerous. She didn't trust him. She had to stay strong for Amina. No, she said, shaking her head quickly. I can't go with you in your car. It's not safe. He raised an eyebrow but didn't press further. All right, I understand. But can you at least help me find the market? Titi glanced at the car and then back at him, her pride and fear battling inside her. It's not far, she said finally. We can walk there together. He nodded, a slight smile playing at the corner of his mouth. Lead the way. As they walked together, the conversation was light. He introduced himself as Olisa, a businessman from the city, new to the area and unfamiliar with the market. Titi shared a little about herself and Amina, though she left out the deeper struggles. When they reached the market, Olisa asked Titi to help him buy some vegetables and other local items. She hesitated at first, but then agreed. They picked out fresh tomatoes, peppers, and some greens. As they moved through the stalls, Olisa's eyes never left her. Pick whatever you like, he said as they finished. It's on me. Titi was taken aback by his generosity, but didn't say anything. She quickly chose a few items for herself, but she still felt unsure. He had no reason to be this kind, but at the same time, she couldn't deny how helpful he was. When they finished shopping, Olisa led them back to his car, and as they neared the vehicle, he pressed some cash into her hands. Here, take this, he said. Titi stared at the money in her hand, speechless. The sum was more than enough to solve her problems for the foreseeable future. She blinked, then wrapped her arms around Olisa in a tight hug, overcome with emotion. Thank you, she whispered. Thank you so much. You have no idea what this means to me. Olisa smiled and patted her back gently. Take care of yourself, Titi. And take care of Amina. I'm glad I could help. Titi stepped back, tears streaming down her face. But this time, they were tears of gratitude. I will. I won't forget this. With a final wave, she watched as Olisa drove away, feeling a glimmer of hope for the first time in a long while. She had no idea why Olisa had been so kind to her, but she knew one thing. She would work hard to make sure this second chance wasn't wasted. Titi smiled as she walked home, her heart lighter than it had been in days. For the first time, she truly believed that things would get better. With the money, Titi went back to her normal life, selling bread and successfully paid Amina's fees. The hot afternoon sun bore down on the market, the air thick with dust and the buzz of busy shoppers. Titi stood by her small stall, selling freshly baked bread. Her heart still raced from the events of how she managed to start all over again. She had used the money Elisa gave her to buy more flour and other supplies, hoping to keep her bread business afloat. She smiled to herself as she watched her customers, feeling a sense of pride in what she had accomplished. Then, a familiar sound cut through the noise of the Marketing engine revving and the screech of tires against the dusty road. Titi's heart skipped a beat as she looked up. There, right in front of her stall, was the sleek black car she had seen on the day Elisa helped her. Her breath caught in her throat as she saw the man step out. It was Elisa. Her excitement was overwhelming. Without thinking, she rushed toward him, her legs moving faster than she could control. "Brother Elisa!" she shouted, her voice filled with joy. Before he could react, she flung her arms around him in a tight hug, her emotions bubbling over. Elisa stumbled back a step, clearly surprised by the sudden affection, but he quickly regained his composure. "Titi," he said, his voice a mix of shock and amusement as he gently pulled away. Titi stepped back, her face flushed with happiness. "Thank you so much for that money," she said, her voice full of gratitude. "Because of you, I was able to go back into my business. I can now make enough to take care of Amina and myself. You have no idea how much it means to me." Elisa smiled, his eyes softening as he looked at her. "I'm glad it helped," he said. "So, what exactly do you sell?" Titi's face lit up even more, her pride shining through. "I sell bread," she said with a bright smile. "Fresh, warm bread. People love it." "Oh, that sounds great," Elisa replied. "Can I see it?" Without hesitation, Titi led him to the small table where her tray of freshly baked bread sat, the loaves tempting the passers-by with their warm, inviting scent. Elisa looked at the bread with genuine interest, then turned back to Titi. "Let me have 2 of those," he said, pointing to the loaves. Titi quickly wrapped up the bread for him, her hands moving with practiced ease. "How much would that be?" Elisa asked, pulling out his wallet. Titi hesitated for a moment, looking down at the money in her hands. "It's 600 naira for the 2, she said softly, her voice quiet but filled with sincerity. "But I want to give you these freely, sir. It's my way of saying thank you for helping me." Elisa shook his head, his smile fading slightly. "No, Titi," he insisted, holding out the money. "I can't just take bread from you for free. You've worked hard for this, and I'm happy to support you." Titi shook her head, refusing to accept it. "No, Brother Elisa," she said firmly, though her voice was soft. "I can't take it. You've already given me so much, more than I ever expected." Elisa raised an eyebrow but didn't push further. "All right," he said with a chuckle, "but I'm paying for the bread, whether you want me to or not." He slid the money back into his pocket and nodded in appreciation. Titi couldn't help but smile. She wrapped up the bread carefully, handed it to him, and then helped him with a few other items he needed from the market. After they finished, Elisa led her back to his car, his demeanor still warm and friendly. As they reached the door, he turned to her. "Titi," he said, his voice calm, "thank you for everything. You've worked hard to rebuild your life, and I admire that. Keep doing what you're doing, and don't let anyone tell you otherwise." Titi felt a lump form in her throat as she looked at him. "Thank you, Brother Elisa," she said quietly, feeling the weight of his kindness. "I don't know how to repay you for everything you've done, but I'll never forget it." With one last smile, Elisa got into his car, giving her a nod before driving off into the distance. Titi stood there for a moment, watching the car disappear around the corner, her heart full of hope and gratitude. This was just the beginning, she knew. Things were changing for the better, and she was ready to embrace the future with both hands.